I guess paperwork or bureaucracy was something that was on my mind a lot because people had spoken so frequently about buying a house being like one of the most stressful events in your life, along with like having a child or something like that.
Okay.
And so I kind of went into it with that anecdote in my head.
Yeah, like
And
you were ready to go to war on this thing. Okay.
I was ready to go to war. Yeah, exactly. And I was trying to think, well, what's the stress? Okay, I mean, I guess there's the money, but then aside from the money, what is it, And so I kept thinking, well, like, oh, if you sign the wrong form or you write, tick off the wrong box, then your life is over or something.
Okay.
So that was probably one of my biggest concerns at the time.
You're listening to Realtor in Your Pocket podcast. Do you want a head start on buying, selling, or renting in Ottawa? You're in the right place. Every episode brings you great advice and insight that you can keep in your back pocket until you make your move. And now, here's your host, Nick Fundytus.
That clip you just heard was from Joel Karwatsky. Joel and his family were clients of mine when they bought their first home, and I'm lucky to have become friends with Joel since that time. You're listening to Realtor in Your Pocket, Ottawa Real Estate and Advice, and today on the podcast, I'm interviewing Joel about his home buying experience. In particular, we'll talk about what it's like to buy a home when the market changes and shifts during your search. I'm Nick Fundytus, and as well as hosting, I'm a realtor at Royal LePage Performance Realty in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. Realtor in Your Pocket is a podcast dedicated to home buyers and sellers in Ontario. Each episode, I'll cover a topic that explains how something in my industry works, done in such a way that gives you the edge when buying or selling your home. Enjoy the show, and if you know someone who could use a realtor in their pocket for advice, share it with them. A 5-star review on iTunes never hurts either, and you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy the show. So I'm on the podcast today with my friend Joel Karwatsky. And Joel and I know each other. We first met as a client. I actually met his wife at an open house in Sandy Hill years ago. How many years ago were you guys looking?
4?
4, yeah.
3.5, 4.
Yeah. So we met at an open house and then met Joel, as part of that home search. And we've stayed in touch. We actually get along great. But Joel had the interesting experience, and the reason I've asked him on today, of searching during a really changing market. And that's something that we're seeing again now. So this is why I've asked him on. So Joel, thanks for coming on today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So the first question I want to ask you is, when you were looking for your first home, what kind of things were you concerned about as a buyer? What kind of things, not necessarily worried about, but what kind of things did you want to make sure you got right?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to think back to that time. I mean, I guess paperwork or bureaucracy was something that was on my mind a lot because people had spoken so frequently about buying a house being like one of the most stressful events in your life, along with like having a child or something like that.
Okay.
And so I kind of went into it with that anecdote in my head.
Yeah, like you were ready to go to war on this thing. Okay.
I was ready to go to war. Yeah, exactly. And I was trying to think, well, what's the stress? Okay, I mean, I guess there's the money, but then aside from the money, what is it, And so I kept thinking, well, like, oh, if you sign the wrong form or you write, tick off the wrong box, then your life is over or something.
Okay.
So that was probably one of my biggest concerns at the time.
Okay. And then when you actually got on the search, what kind of issues did you run into? We talked about one just before we started. And
yeah.
So you did have some interesting stories from the search.
Yeah, actually. So I want to preface this with the statement that it actually wasn't that bad at all. Perhaps thanks to you as my real estate agent at the time, but it wasn't that bad.
And we're still friends a few years later, so it must have turned out okay.
Yeah, so it was okay. Everything was fine. But yeah, it actually was. There was quite a diversity of unexpected problems. That's what you asked, right? Like what things ended up being a problem. Yeah. Yeah, unexpectedly, in a final inspection of one of the houses, there was something that wasn't disclosed where the floor, as seen from the basement, so like the main floor, as seen from the basement, was incredibly charred by a serious fire, and that this had been hidden the first time around, ostensibly because the basement was too full to walk into, and then we eventually realized it wasn't, they filled it on purpose so that we couldn't see that the floor was so charred that I believe the inspector had a pencil and could stick his pencil half an inch into the wood with no
because it was just burned into. Like, how that living room was still holding up was really surprising to me. We went into that house twice. So the first time we went in there was for a showing. We thought it was good. You guys were ready. Had you made an offer already, or had we done an offer or an inspection in anticipation of an offer?
I can't remember.
We had a home inspector in there though, I was so embarrassed that an inspector walked in here, and this was not something we'd seen on the first time, but really, like, they had put stuff in the way of being able to see this. And there had been a fire at some point in the life of this house in the basement that burned the ceiling above. It was ridiculous. It's a story that I still, when I talk to new clients, this is one of like about 3 or 4 stories. I always have to say, this is the kind of weird thing that can come up.
But what was good is that despite this kind of like serious issue, it ended up being a non-issue because of the way the system works. It was actually comforting because, like, I was really fearful, as I was saying, like, oh, if I tick the wrong box, my life is over. But then it turned out there's so many protections that, like, this happened, and it was like, okay, so, we're not committed to the house, and we just walked away.
Yeah. And then the other one was more of a legal issue. And that one was like, it was way less serious. It was just one of those things where, the lawyer steps in and gives his opinion on something. And that's exactly why you hire a lawyer. Yeah. Yeah. So it was, tell a little about that one.
Yeah, that was interesting. That was it was a house in Wellington West. I think that's what the area is.
Yeah, it was right off of Island Park.
It was off of Island Park. Yeah. Exactly. And it had an easement, which I didn't know what that was at the time, but it's a region where I guess the city has certain rights to the land, a certain amount of rights to, I guess, normally easements involve a little bit of land in front of your house if they need to, I guess, put parking signs.
That often involves utilities and things like that. And it's not always the city, but the city is the most common one to have an easement.
Okay. Thank you. In this case, I think you had seen the easement details, and they seemed a little bit circumspect to you. Something you were not familiar with.
Right.
So you recommended contacting a lawyer, which we did, and
it was actually, I think, Eli Udell, right?
Yeah, I think that's right.
He was the first person we interviewed on this podcast, actually. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I should hear that episode. And he went to summer camp with my wife.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, so that was, but the reason, and you were right to notice something a little different. It was I would say about a third of the lot was in fact an easement, if not more. And because there was some sort of drainage pipe under the land, and the lawyer, Eli, you said was his name?
Yeah.
I think he had 14 reasons why we shouldn't buy the house. And he said any one of them should be enough not to buy the house. And essentially, the city just had full rights over this giant chunk of the land. If they needed to do anything, anytime, they could.
They could do it. Yeah, so they could show up one day and say, hey, we need to dig out what is basically all of your driveway and your garage.
Yeah.
If we decide we want to keep this land, we kind of can.
Yeah.
And you probably won't be able to build a garage again, even if we pave it back over. So like there goes your garage.
And as a result, we were renting this region of the land as
Yes.
we would have been renting, and they could have changed the cost of the rent, and we would have no say in the matter. So, anyways, we didn't go for it. We did not go through with the deal because of that. It was a weird little thing.
Yeah. So, but in the end, the property that you actually bought in the Civic Hospital area was when the market was starting to accelerate. So since then, we've seen another acceleration. So this is relevant again, and now a big change with COVID-19, obviously. So one of the things that I remember was the original negotiations on your current place, they weren't getting anywhere. Like we negotiated on your current price. They were really digging in their heels. It was one of those situations that a lot of people get in. I have buyers in a very similar situation today where it just gets frustrating. You're kind of like, as a buyer, aren't you kind of in your head saying like, do these guys not understand that their house has been sitting on the market for a while and it's just not worth this much?
It was very weird.
Yeah. So tell a little bit about how all that went, and then the one on Holland, and then your place.
Right. So, well, it's almost like what you said. It was pretty black and white. We placed an offer on the house, and it was like a reasonable percentage lower, some sort of generic, I don't know, 10% less or 5% less. I don't remember anymore. And it
was backed up by market stats. Like we looked around and we said, okay, for a semi in this spot with this size, this is about what it should be worth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think at the time the house was we felt it was overvalued by maybe 5% or something.
Sure.
So we countered by 5 to 8%, and their counter offer I think went down by like $100 or $1,000 or none. I think initially there was zero.
Yes, one of their counters was no dollars.
No dollars. So I was like, oh well, that's unexpected. I think we stepped away.
We did step away, and there was the one came up on Holland. We thought, you know what, this is nearby. It's on Holland, which is a little bit busier, but you know, it looks pretty good. So
yeah, it was great. It was right. It was like Holland, which was a little bit busier, but it was a beautiful neighborhood, and the place was, you know, looks great. It presented great. So we really like were interested in buying. So I think we bid above the asking by a certain amount.
You did, and I looked it up because I wanted to remember like the conversation that we had, and the conversation went something, I think it was listed at 505 or 515, and I think if I can say this on here, I think you guys went over like 15 or something, which was a really solid, like you're at 530 or something, which was a really solid offer. Mm-hmm. Like at the time, like in the current market when we started out, that was a good competitive offer, and I think there were over 10 offers on that property. And I remember being out in the evening, you know, out in the evening with the other realtors who are all getting cattle called to go like one at a time to go in and present our offer to the seller. So I presented our offer. They were very polite. I think it was the first or second person to go. So they seemed like, oh, great, we got an offer above asking price. This is excellent. And then I went out. And then eventually everybody gets sent home, and then they announce the results. Oh no, they announced the results out there, and they told us the sale price, and the sale price was,
I remember
the sale. Do you remember the sale price? I think it was
pretty sure it was $725.
$725. Okay, it was
whatever
it was. It was over. It was over 100 over
maybe six.
What you guys had offered. And it was one of the very first instances that I remember where the market had changed, that somebody had just taken a huge swing like that. Like that was an offer that was talked about in our offices the next day. Said, did you hear how much that one on Holland went for? Yeah. And it was on Holland, which is, you know, a relatively busy street. It was unexpected for it to go that high. And I remember I had the conversation with you on the phone. I said, you know, you guys put in a strong bid, but it went for 630. You know, it was higher than you guys were going to go anyways. And then you said, oh yeah, we weren't going to go that high anyways. It was a very calm conversation. I got off the phone. Then I kind of heard what I had said. And I checked with the realtor, said, oh, she had said 630, which was 100 something over what you had offered. I went back and I said, hey, what I kind of heard that I said to you was 630, and I verified that number is correct, but we probably heard 530, which was just a little bit above what you'd offered. So it was 100 something over, not just like 5 or 10 over what you had offered. And we were like, oh yeah, holy crap.
Yeah, it was crazy. And it was the next day, Nick, I think. So that happened, and I ruminated that on that, maybe over, you know, in my sleep. And I woke up the next morning. I remember talking to my wife, and I said, oh, well, the house that we had bid on also in the Civic area where the owners weren't budging, that all of a sudden becomes a fantastic deal because it was 1.5 blocks from the one that we lost for $100,000.
It was off of Holland, and I would say house-wise, like the yards was a little smaller, but house-wise, it was a better house.
Yeah, it was a better house.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, well, maybe someone else or the other agents in the neighborhood are going to realize this. And so it was that day at some point I called you and I said, just give them what they want. Give them what they want because it's still a deal now.
Yeah. And a few years later, like seeing what has happened in your neighborhood, now it really does seem like a deal because like what's gone on in the market since then. But credit to you guys, like to you and Debbie, because not everybody would go back and do that because they would have been kind of annoyed by their previous interaction with the seller who didn't want to budge. And you kind of stand on pride a little bit and say, well, I'm not going to go back and deal with these jerks. But you guys said, hey, you know what? This is shifting sands. We're gonna roll with what's happening here, and go make our move before anybody else figures out that this one around the corner we can actually have for less than we would have had to pay for the one on the busy street. So yeah, you guys did a really good job on that one.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That was my exact thinking. I was like, oh, things are changing fast. We got to act fast.
Yeah, I think when we got on the phone the next day, you were kind of like, I think we have to go offer on the place you're on now. And I said, I was thinking we might have to do that. That was going to be my recommendation today. And then my last question was there any hesitation to offer on your place, knowing that you were giving the seller a higher offer than you had originally decided to settle on? But you've already answered that. You said like, no, that simply was the reality. Like you guys were ready to deal with what the market is the market, like, and it doesn't always fit what you want it to be. And I think your situation is a really good lesson to people who are out there maybe buying their first house, or even people who just like bought their house in a different market, like in a more stable market. And now when this, in the current situation where the sellers have a fair bit of power, you've got to kind of roll with the punches a bit.
Yeah, it's too bad. But I mean, that's the way it is.
But in the end, you have a fantastic house in a nice spot. So
yeah, I couldn't be happier. And in fact, just to take a moment, like I frequently am sitting in my house, and I can't believe I live in this house. Like I never in my life, like it feels like a mansion. It's not that big for whoever is watching or listening to this podcast. It is not a mansion, but to me, it feels like a mansion. So I'm very happy.
That's good. That makes me very happy. A few years later, you're still loving the place. Well, and Debbie likes it too.
Oh, we're both equally. We're very happy.
Good. Well, and you even have some during coronavirus. You even have some room to have some relatives in with you, Stan. So that's good.
Yeah, it's great. Wonderful.
Yeah. Cool. That's all the questions on the real estate side. So thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it, Joel.
My pleasure, and it's a lot of fun actually. Thanks.
That's the show for episode 4. On upcoming episodes, I'll be talking about practical steps for getting your home sold with a minimum of stress in a seller series. If you know someone who's thinking of making a move soon, share this podcast with them. It's available in video form on YouTube, audio on iTunes, and wherever else you get your podcasts. I also post regularly at my site at nickfundytus.ca, where I go deep into advice on how to buy or sell a home. You can shoot me an email at nick@nickfundytus.ca, and I will always take time to respond to your questions about real estate or ideas for future episodes. I'd love a 5-star review on iTunes, since that helps others to find me. A big thanks to Joel for coming on the show today, and a big thanks also to my wonderful marketing admin, Stephanie Ross, who helps produce and promote the show. She helps to keep me on schedule and make sure that our listeners can find us. Thank you for listening and subscribing. I hope that wherever you are, you're staying home, staying healthy, and staying safe. This has been Realtor in Your Pocket podcast, and I'm Nick Fundytus.